The village of Nyamongo lay at the heart of the great African jungle, where the trees whispered secrets to the wind and the river sang lullabies to the moon. It was a place of wisdom, tradition, and hidden magic. But there was one rule that no soul dared to break. No one must beat the midnight drum. Legends spoke of a time long ago when the drum was played, and the jungle itself awakened in ways no man could explain. Some said it was the call of the spirits. Others claimed it was a doorway to another world. One fateful night, a curious young boy named Kwame sat by the fire, listening to the village elders tell the tale of the midnight drum. His eyes widened with curiosity as Elder Babu spoke in a hushed tone. "It is hidden deep in the jungle, in the forbidden grove of Orochi, where no man enters and returns the same." Kwame's heart pounded. He had always loved adventure, but this was different. This was a mystery he had to solve. Later that night, as the village slept, Kwame lay awake. The words of Elder Babu echoed in his mind. What made the midnight drum so dangerous? Why was it hidden? His curiosity burned like fire. He had always been drawn to stories of magic and mystery, and this was the greatest of them all. The jungle beyond the village was alive with the sounds of the night. Crickets chirped, distant animals howled, and the leaves rustled as if whispering secrets. Kwame had ventured into the forest many times before, but never beyond the sacred boundary. He knew the elders would forbid him, but something deep inside told him he had to find out the truth for himself. The following evening, just before the village fires dimmed, Kwame made his decision. He would find the midnight drum. He wrapped himself in a dark cloak, tucked a small knife into his waist, and carried a calabash of water. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he had to be prepared. As he stepped out of his hut, the night air felt heavy, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. He walked past the sleeping village, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that if he was caught, the elders would punish him severely. But this was bigger than fear. This was destiny. At the edge of the jungle, Kwame hesitated. The trees loomed like silent giants, their twisted branches stretching toward the moon. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The night swallowed him whole. The deeper Kwame went into the jungle, the more he felt like he was being watched. The trees seemed to whisper his name, and strange rustling sounds followed his footsteps. He turned, but there was nothing, only the thick shadows shifting with the wind. Then he saw them, glowing yellow eyes, dozens of them. A chill ran down his spine. Was it wild animals? Spirits? His instincts told him to run, but his heart told him to stay. Slowly he reached for his knife. Then a voice echoed through the trees. "Why do you seek the forbidden drum, child?" Kwame froze. The voice was neither kind nor cruel, but it carried the weight of something ancient. His hands trembled as he whispered, "I just want to know the truth." The jungle went silent. Then the eyes disappeared, one by one, fading into the darkness. The path before him suddenly became clear, illuminated by the silver glow of the moon. It was as if the jungle had accepted his journey. For now, after what felt like hours of walking, Kwame reached a place unlike any other in the jungle. The trees were enormous, their roots twisting like serpents across the ground. Strange markings covered their bark, glowing faintly under the moonlight. This was Orochi, the Forbidden Grove. But before he could take another step, a towering figure emerged from the shadows. It was an old man, his skin dark as the night, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. He carried a staff carved with symbols of power, and his voice rumbled like thunder. "You have come too far, boy. The drum is not for mortal hands." Kwame clenched his fists. He had not journeyed this far to turn back. "Please," he said, "I need to know why it's forbidden. I need to hear its sound." The old man studied him for a long moment. Then, with a deep sigh, he turned and began walking deeper into the grove. If you seek the drum, you must first understand its curse. With that, Kwame followed him, stepping further into the unknown. The old man led Kwame deeper into the grove, where the air felt thick with an unseen force. The trees seemed alive, their branches shifting as if whispering secrets. At the center of the grove stood a massive stone altar, and atop it rested the midnight drum. It was unlike any drum Kwame had ever seen. Its surface was made of an ancient hide, stretched tightly over a carved ebony base. Strange symbols lined its edges, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It pulsed as if it had a heartbeat. The old man, who Kwame now understood was the guardian of the drum, turned to him with piercing eyes. "This drum is not just an instrument. It is a gateway," he said. Swallowed hard. The whispers in the trees. Were they the spirits of those who had been cursed? Had they been watching him all along? Yet, despite the fear curling in his stomach, he felt an undeniable pull toward the drum. What would happen if he played it again? The guardian stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Kwame's shoulder. "You must leave now, boy. You have seen what you came to see." But Kwame couldn't take his eyes off the drum. It seemed to hum, calling to him, begging to be played. The air around it vibrated with unseen energy, and he could almost hear a rhythm, soft, distant like a heartbeat. "I don't understand," Kwame said. "If it's so dangerous, why not destroy it?" The guardian's face darkened. "Because destruction is not always the answer. The drum holds great power, and power must be contained, not erased. If it is ever played again, the spirits will awaken, and no one knows what they will do." Kwame nodded, but his heart was restless. His hands itched to touch the drum. He had come this far, risked everything. How could he leave without knowing what it sounds like? The guardian sighed. "Go now. The jungle has allowed you to leave, but if you stay any longer, it may change its mind." Kwame hesitated, then took a slow step back. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. One day, he would return. Kwame returned to the village before dawn, his heart still pounding from what he had seen. He lay in his sleeping mat, staring at the thatched roof above him, trying to make sense of everything. The guardian's warning echoed in his mind. If it is ever played again, the spirits will awaken, and no one knows what they will do. But why did it feel as though the drum was calling to him? What if he was meant to play it? By morning, the village had come alive with the usual bustle, women pounding yam, children chasing each other through the dusty paths, elders gathered beneath the baobab tree, speaking in low voices. But Kwame felt like an outsider, burdened by a truth he couldn't share. At midday, he sat alone by the river, skipping stones across the water. His best friend, Jabari, soon joined him. "You've been acting strange, Kwame," Jabari said, narrowing his eyes. "Where did you go last night?" Kwame hesitated. He wanted to tell Jabari, but the story was too dangerous. If the elders found out he had gone to Orochi's grove, he would be punished, maybe even banished. "Nowhere," he finally said. Jabari studied him for a long time, then smirked. "You're a terrible liar." Kwame forced a laugh, but deep down, he knew the truth wouldn't stay hidden forever. That night, Kwame tossed and turned in his sleep. Then, just before midnight, he heard it. A whisper. "Kwame, Kwame." His eyes snapped open. The voice wasn't coming from his hut. It was coming from outside. Slowly, he sat up and peered through the cracks in the wooden walls. Shadows moved between the trees, shifting unnaturally. His heartbeat quickened. Could they be the cursed souls? He swallowed hard. Maybe the guardian had been right. Maybe the spirits were watching him now, waiting for him to make a mistake. Then something even more chilling happened. The sound of a drumbeat echoed through the night, once, twice, then silence. Kwame's blood ran cold. Someone or something had played the drum. The next morning, the village was in turmoil. The elders had gathered at the center, speaking in hushed but urgent voices. The chief, an old but powerful man named Mzi Okoro, looked troubled. "Someone has disturbed the jungle," he said. "Last night the spirits stirred. I could feel their unrest in the wind." Kwame's stomach tightened. Could they hear the drums echo too? One of the elders, an old woman named Mama Naima, shook her head. "The midnight drum must never be played. We sealed it away for a reason." Another elder, Baba Jengo, turned to the villagers. "If anyone knows something, speak now." Kwame clenched his fists. He wanted to confess, but fear held his tongue. He had not played the drum, but he had been near it. What if the spirits had followed him back? As the elders continued their discussion, Jabari leaned in and whispered, "You do know something, don't you?" Kwame met his best friend's gaze. Should he tell him the truth? One thing was certain. The midnight drum had awakened and something was coming. Kwame pulled Jabari aside, away from the villagers' prying eyes. His hands trembled as he whispered, "I went into the jungle. I saw the drum." Jabari's eyes widened. "You what?" "Shh." Kwame glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I didn't touch it, I swear. But something, or someone, played it last night." Jabari exhaled sharply. "This is bad, really bad." Kwame nodded. "We have to find out who played it before the elders do. If they suspect me..." He didn't need to finish his sentence. If the elders found out, he could be cast out of the village. Jabari hesitated, then placed a hand on Kwame's shoulder. "All right, we keep this between us. But we need to be careful. If the spirits are awake, we don't know what they'll do." Kwame nodded, his heart heavy. He had seen the midnight drum, heard its whispers, and now its curse had begun. That night, Kwame couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the single, eerie drumbeat from the night before. Had the spirits really awakened? What would they do? He turned over on his mat, and that's when he saw it. A mark. It was faint but unmistakable, an intricate symbol glowing dimly on his wrist. His breath hitched. It was the same symbol he had seen on the drum. Panic rose in his chest. Was this a warning? A curse? He rubbed his wrist furiously, but the mark wouldn't fade. Just then, the hut's entrance rustled. A gust of cold wind swept inside, carrying with it a whisper. "Find the drum before it finds you." Kwame's blood turned to ice. The spirits were watching him, and now they had marked him. The next day, Kwame avoided everyone. He wore a cloth around his wrist to hide the mark, but he could still feel it burning beneath the fabric. He needed answers. Sneaking away from the village, he made his way towards the hut of Nana Ayodele, the oldest woman in Nyamongo. They said she was over 100 years old and knew secrets even the elders dared not speak. He found her sitting outside, humming an old tune as she crushed herbs in a calabash. "I knew you would come," she said before he could even speak. Kwame's throat went dry. "You did?" Nana Ayodele nodded, then pointed at his wrist. "The spirits have chosen you. The drum calls for you now." Kwame's heart pounded. "But why me?" The old woman's expression darkened. "Because long ago your bloodline was tied to the drum. You are not just any boy, Kwame. You are the key." Kwame staggered back. "What do you mean?" Nana Ayodele sighed. "Long ago, before the drum was hidden, it was played by a powerful king. That king was your ancestor." Kwame's chest tightened. "The one who angered the spirits." The old woman nodded. "And now they watch you, waiting. If the drum has been played again, the spirits will seek the one who carries his blood." Kwame felt sick. His ancestor had brought a curse upon the land, and now he was bound to it. Nana Ayodele leaned in. You have two choices, child. Find the drum and stop the spirits, or let them consume you." Kwame clenched his fists. He had never been afraid of adventure, but this was a battle between the living and the dead, and he was right in the middle of it. That night, Kwame made his choice. He would go back to Orochi's grove. He packed a small satchel, some food, a knife, and a torch. As he stepped outside, a familiar voice called his name. "Going somewhere?" He turned to see Jabari, arms crossed. Kwame sighed. "I have to find the drum before the spirits do." Jabari hesitated, then nodded. "Then you're not going alone." The two boys slipped into the jungle, the moonlight barely piercing through the thick canopy. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Then the shadows began to move. A low whisper rose around them, the wind carrying voices from the other side. "Return what was taken, or suffer." Kwame and Jabari froze as a dark figure stepped out from the trees. It was not human. The figure that emerged from the shadows was tall and cloaked in mist. Its eyes glowed like dying embers, and its voice slithered through the night like a hiss of wind. "You do not belong here. The drum is not yours to seek." Kwame's breath caught in his throat. The presence before him was neither fully human nor fully spirit. It was a spirit walker, a soul caught between the living and the dead. Jabari gripped Kwame's arm. "What do we do?" he whispered. Kwame forced himself to speak. "Who played the drum?" The spirit walker stepped closer. "The one who seeks power, the one who would unleash the forgotten." Kwame and Jabari exchanged a look. Someone in the village had played the drum, but who? Before they could ask another question, the spirit walker lifted a hand, and a gust of black wind swept toward them. The jungle itself seemed to twist and bend, the trees groaning in agony. "Run!" Kwame shouted. They turned and bolted, the whispers of the spirits chasing them through the jungle. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the village. Panting, Jabari doubled over. "That thing wasn't just a spirit," he gasped. "It was looking for something." Kwame nodded, his mind racing. Or someone. He thought of the spirit walker's words. "The one who seeks power." His stomach clenched. Someone had played the drum for a reason. But why? Who in the village would dare to awaken the spirits? Then, from behind them, a voice spoke. "You should not have gone into the jungle." Kwame and Jabari spun around. Standing in the shadows, watching them with knowing eyes, was Baba Jengo, one of the village elders. Baba Jengo stepped forward, his eyes unreadable. "You were in the jungle," he said quietly. "You saw them." Kwame swallowed hard. "You know about the spirits?" The elder exhaled. "I know more than you think, and I know that the drum's power must never be touched." He looked around before lowering his voice. "Someone in the village seeks the drum's magic, but they do not understand its cost." Jabari frowned. "Who would do that?" Baba Jengo hesitated, then shook his head. "I do not know yet, but listen to me, Kwame. If the spirits have marked you, you are now part of this curse, and if the drum is played again—" He did not finish the sentence, but Kwame already knew what he meant. That night, Kwame barely slept. His wrist burned, the mark glowing faintly under the moonlight. Then a sudden wave of heat washed over him. He sat up, gasping. The air in his hut had grown thick, like the inside of a fire pit. Smoke curled from the walls. And then he saw it. A vision. Flames devoured the village. Shadows danced among the fire, their voices raised in an unholy chant. And in the center of it all stood a lone figure, playing the midnight drum. Kwame's pulse pounded. He tried to focus, to see who it was, but before the vision could reveal the face, the fire surged toward him. And he woke up, drenched in sweat. "The village is in danger," By sunrise, Kwame knew what he had to do. He and Jabari had to find out who played the drum and stop them before they did it again. They moved carefully through the village, watching the faces of the people they had known their whole lives. Could one of them truly have risked everything to unleash the spirits? As they walked past the river, a movement caught Kwame's eye. A figure was crouched near the water, washing their hands. But something was strange. The water was turning black. Kwame's breath hitched. The figure turned slightly, and for a brief moment, Kwame saw it, a faint, glowing mark on their wrist. His heart dropped. The drummer wasn't just anyone, it was one of their own. Kwame's pulse thundered in his ears. He stepped closer, trying to get a better look at the figure by the river. The black water swirled around their hands, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the unmistakable glow of the drum's mark on their wrist. Jabari grabbed Kwame's arm. "Who is it?" he whispered. The figure straightened as if sensing their presence. The early morning sun revealed a face they knew well. Ayo. Kwame's stomach clenched. Ayo was a young hunter respected for his bravery and skill. But now his hands were stained with the spirit's dark energy. Ayo's eyes flickered toward them. For a moment, something unreadable passed over his face. Guilt, fear, or something worse. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the jungle. Kwame and Jabari exchanged a look. The drummer wasn't just a stranger. It was someone from their own village. And now he was running. Kwame didn't hesitate. "We have to follow him," Jabari hesitated. "Are you crazy? He played the midnight drum. Who knows what kind of power he has now?" Kwame clenched his fists. "That's exactly why we have to stop him." Jabari groaned but nodded. Together they followed Ayo's trail into the jungle. The deeper they went, the darker the forest became. The wind carried whispers, warning them to turn back. But Kwame ignored them. Then, a rustling ahead. Kwame slowed. Ayo was up ahead, crouched near a large tree, his hands pressed against the bark. At first, Kwame thought he was hiding, but then he saw the truth. He was drawing symbols on the tree in dark ink. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie energy. "Ayo!" Kwame stepped forward. Ayo spun around, his eyes wide with something that sent chills down Kwame's spine. They were completely black. Ayo stared at them, unmoving. His black eyes reflected no light, no soul, just an endless void. "Ayo," Kwame said cautiously, raising his hands in peace. "What are you doing?" Ayo's lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. "I have seen beyond the veil, Kwame," he whispered. "The drum, it showed me." Jabari took a step back. "You're not yourself. The spirits have chosen me," Ayo interrupted, his voice hollow. "They are coming." Then, before either of them could react, Ayo's body convulsed. His limbs twisted unnaturally, and a guttural sound ripped from his throat. The symbols on the tree flared brightly, and from the jungle, shadows began to move. "Run," Kwame whispered. But it was too late. The shadows rose from the ground, taking form. They had no faces, only hollow voids where eyes should be. Their long, clawed fingers reached out, grasping at the air. Kwame grabbed Jabari's wrist. "We have to get out of here." He saw it. A vision. Flames devoured the village. Shadows danced among the fire, their voices raised in an unholy chant. And in the center of it all stood a lone figure, playing the midnight drum. Kwame's pulse pounded. He tried to focus, to see who it was, but before the vision could reveal the face, the fire surged toward him. And he woke up, drenched in sweat. The village is in danger. By sunrise, Kwame knew what he had to do. He and Jabari had to find out who played the drum and stop them before they did it again. They moved carefully through the village, watching the faces of the people they had known their whole lives. Could one of them truly have risked everything to unleash the spirits? As they walked past the river, a movement caught Kwame's eye. A figure was crouched near the water, washing their hands. But something was strange. The water was turning black. Kwame's breath hitched. The figure turned slightly, and for a brief moment, Kwame saw it, a faint, glowing mark on their wrist. His heart dropped. The drummer wasn't just anyone, it was one of their own. Kwame's pulse thundered in his ears. He stepped closer, trying to get a better look at the figure by the river. The black water swirled around their hands, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the unmistakable glow of the drum's mark on their wrist. Jabari grabbed Kwame's arm. "Who is it?" he whispered. The figure straightened as if sensing their presence. The early morning sun revealed a face they knew well. Ayo. Kwame's stomach clenched. Ayo was a young hunter respected for his bravery and skill. But now his hands were stained with the spirit's dark energy. Ayo's eyes flickered toward them. For a moment, something unreadable passed over his face. Guilt, fear, or something worse. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the jungle. Kwame and Jabari exchanged a look. The drummer wasn't just a stranger. It was someone from their own village. And now he was running. Kwame didn't hesitate. "We have to follow him," Jabari hesitated. "Are you crazy? He played the midnight drum. Who knows what kind of power he has now?" Kwame clenched his fists. "That's exactly why we have to stop him." Jabari groaned but nodded. Together they followed Ayo's trail into the jungle. The deeper they went, the darker the forest became. The wind carried whispers, warning them to turn back. But Kwame ignored them. Then, a rustling ahead. Kwame slowed. Ayo was up ahead, crouched near a large tree, his hands pressed against the bark. At first, Kwame thought he was hiding, but then he saw the truth. He was drawing symbols on the tree in dark ink. The symbols glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie energy. "Ayo!" Kwame stepped forward. Ayo spun around, his eyes wide with something that sent chills down Kwame's spine. They were completely black. Ayo stared at them, unmoving. His black eyes reflected no light, no soul, just an endless void. "Ayo," Kwame said cautiously, raising his hands in peace. "What are you doing?" Ayo's lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. "I have seen beyond the veil, Kwame," he whispered. "The drum, it showed me." Jabari took a step back. "You're not yourself. The spirits have chosen me," Ayo interrupted, his voice hollow. "They are coming." Then, before either of them could react, Ayo's body convulsed. His limbs twisted unnaturally, and a guttural sound ripped from his throat. The symbols on the tree flared brightly, and from the jungle, shadows began to move. "Run," Kwame whispered. But it was too late. The shadows rose from the ground, taking form. They had no faces, only hollow voids where eyes should be. Their long, clawed fingers reached out, grasping at the air. Kwame grabbed Jabari's wrist. "We have to get out of here." But Ayo stepped in front of them, his face twisted in something between pain and euphoria. He was no longer Ayo. "The drum must be played again," he rasped. "And this time, it will not be silenced." Kwame's mind raced. If Ayo was truly possessed, then he was no longer just a boy from their village. He was a vessel. Jabari yanked Kwame's arm. "Kwame, move!" But Kwame couldn't. The shadows were closing in, and Ayo was leading them. Just when Kwame thought they were doomed, a sudden gust of wind tore through the jungle, scattering the shadows like mist. A powerful drumming sound echoed through the trees, not from the midnight drum, but from another source. From the shadows stepped the guardian. His eyes burned with ancient power, and in his hands he held a smaller drum, one made of golden wood and white leather. He struck it once more, and the spirits recoiled. "Ayo," the guardian called, his voice deep with command. "The spirits deceive you. Let them go." For a moment, something flickered in Ayo's black eyes. A hesitation, a struggle. Then he screamed. The spirits inside him fought against the Guardian's magic. The jungle howled, the trees bending under the force of their rage. Kwame felt his own body tremble. He knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The wind howled through the jungle as the Guardian struck his drum once more. The power of the beat was felt in Kwame's bones, reverberating through the trees and stirring the very earth beneath their feet. Ayo fell to his knees, clutching his head as if trying to tear away the voices in his mind. His body shook violently. The shadows surrounding him writhed, their clawed fingers trying to reach for him, pulling at his soul. "Ayo!" Kwame shouted, rushing toward him. But the Guardian's drumbeat was so powerful that Kwame was forced to kneel, the weight of the spirits pressing down on him. The Guardian's voice boomed over the chaos. "Ayo, listen to me. You are not theirs to control. The drum's power is not for you." For a moment, Ayo's body went still. His black eyes seemed to focus for the first time in what felt like forever. But the spirit screamed inside him, forcing him to rise again. "The drum." Ayo's voice was barely a whisper. I can't stop it." Kwame felt a pang of sympathy. Ayo had not asked for this. He had been consumed by something far older, far more dangerous. And now the jungle itself was on the brink of destruction. "Ayo, fight it!" Kwame shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. The air was thick with tension, the jungle holding its breath as Ayo made his choice. And then, with a roar, the spirits released their hold on him. Ayo collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The shadows vanished as if they had never existed, leaving only the faint glow of the glowing symbols on the trees. Kwame rushed to his side, pulling him up. "Ayo, are you all right?" Ayo's body trembled, his face pale. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his hand reached out, grabbing Kwame's wrist. The mark from the drum burned hot, and for a second Kwame thought Ayo might pass out. But Ayo's voice came in a hoarse whisper. I didn't know. The spirits, they offered me power, and I took it." Kwame understood then. Ayo hadn't been evil. He had been lost, consumed by the same temptation that had cursed his ancestors' bloodline. The power of the drum was too much for any soul to handle. "You didn't ask for this," Kwame said softly. Ayo nodded weakly. "But now the spirits will come for me, Kwame. They will come for all of us." As Ayo spoke, the jungle grew eerily quiet. The air felt heavy, suffocating. And then, from deep within the trees, came the sound of drums. Not just one, but dozens of drums echoing through the jungle like a heartbeat that shook the very foundation of the earth. The spirits were waking up, and this time they were angry. Kwame's heart raced. The drums were calling for something, someone. "We need to leave," Jabari urged, grabbing Kwame's arm, "before they come for us." Kwame shook his head. "We can't leave. We have to stop them. If the drums keep calling, they'll destroy everything." Ayo lifted his head, his eyes filled with fear. "It's too late. The drums are calling to those who are lost, those who have been marked by the spirits." Kwame's mind raced. The curse was spreading, and if they didn't stop it now, the entire village, and possibly the jungle itself, would fall to the spirits' wrath. But how could they stop it when the power of the drums was so great? With no time to waste, Kwame and Jabari followed the sound of the drums deeper into the jungle. The air was thick with energy, the ground trembling beneath their feet. As they moved forward, they saw a clearing in the distance, a sacred place. The ancient stone circle stood at the heart of the jungle, bathed in a ghostly light. The drums beat louder now, their sound echoing from the circle like a call to war. At the center of the circle stood the midnight drum. It was larger than before, its dark wood gleaming under the moonlight. The symbols on its surface glowed with an otherworldly light, and the air around it buzzed with power. Kwame felt his blood run cold. This was it, the source of the curse, but as he stepped closer, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. A figure emerged from the darkness, wearing a long cloak made of jungle vines. It was the Guardian. The Guardian stepped forward, his face grim. "The drum calls to you, Kwame. You are the last one." Kwame stared at him, confused. "What do you mean? I've never touched it." The Guardian shook his head. "You don't need to touch it. The drum's power is in your blood, child, your ancestors' blood. The drum knows you, and now it has called you to stop it." Kwame's heart pounded. "What do you mean, stop it?" The Guardian's expression softened. "The drum must never be played again. If it is, the spirits will rise and destroy all that you know. The curse cannot be undone unless the drum is destroyed." Kwame swallowed hard. The weight of the responsibility was unbearable, but he had no choice. The drum must be destroyed. Kwame stared at the midnight drum, the weight of the Guardian's words sinking in. The jungle itself seemed to pulse with the power of the drum, as if it were alive, waiting. "How do we destroy it?" Kwame asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Guardian stepped forward, his eyes filled with ancient knowledge. "There is only one way. The drum must be returned to the place where it was first created, the heart of the jungle. Only there can it be unmade." Kwame frowned. "But the jungle is not what it once was. The spirits have already awoken." The Guardian nodded. "Yes, the spirits are drawn to the drum's power, and they will fight to keep it. But there is no other way. The drum is the source. Without it, the curse will fade, and the jungle can heal." Jabari shifted uneasily. "What about Ayo? He's still marked by the drum's magic." The Guardian glanced toward Ayo, who had fallen silent, his eyes distant. "Ayo will come with us. The drum has claimed him, but he can break free. The same way the jungle can be saved, so can he." Kwame nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. But there was no time for hesitation. The jungle was at war with itself. The spirits were restless, and the midnight drum was their anchor. "We go now," Kwame said, steeling himself. The journey to the heart of the jungle was perilous. The deeper they ventured, the darker and more dangerous the jungle became. Strange creatures slinked through the underbrush, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. Ayo, still haunted by the spirits, struggled to keep up. His steps faltered, and the blackness in his eyes flickered with the ghosts that tormented him. Kwame felt pity for him, but knew there was no time to stop. They had to reach the heart before the jungle fell into eternal chaos. Hours passed, and the path grew more treacherous. Vines twisted in unnatural shapes, and the sounds of unseen predators echoed through the air. The jungle seemed to watch them, its heartbeat quickening with each step they took toward the center of its power. Jabari stumbled over a root, and Kwame helped him up. "We're close," he said. "The jungle is testing us." But even as they pressed forward, a low rumble filled the air, and the ground beneath their feet began to shake. Something was coming. The rumbling grew louder until the jungle seemed to roar in fury. Trees began to bend and crack, their branches reaching out like grasping hands. The air turned thick with smoke and the scent of burning wood. From the depths of the jungle came the spirits. They rose from the earth like a tide, their dark shapes swirling and twisting in the air. Their faces were a blur of shadows, their eyes hollow voids that seemed to devour the light. They were here for the drum, and they would stop at nothing to protect it. "Ayo!" Kwame shouted, turning to the young hunter. "You must fight them. You can control the spirits within you." Ayo lifted his head, his black eyes flickering. I don't know how." Kwame grabbed his shoulder. "You must. The drum's power is inside you. Use it to stop them." For a moment, Ayo hesitated. Then his eyes began to glow, and he extended his hands toward the spirits. The jungle fell silent. The spirits paused as if sensing his power. And then, with a sudden burst of energy, Ayo shouted, and the spirits recoiled. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Ayo's voice rang out again, louder this time. The spirits shuddered and began to fade, retreating back into the jungle. Ayo's body trembled with exhaustion, but he stood tall. "I can fight them," he whispered. "But not alone," Kwame nodded. "We fight together." They continued forward, but the path was now more treacherous than ever. The jungle had grown wild and untamed, its spirits restless and angry. It seemed to fight against them, trying to pull them back from the heart. And then they reached it. The heart of the jungle was not a place, but an ancient clearing where the earth seemed to hum with power. Massive trees surrounded the area, their roots forming an intricate pattern in the ground. At the center stood an altar made of stone, where the midnight drum sat, glowing in the dim light. Kwame could feel the drum's presence even before he saw it. It thrummed with dark energy, pulling at his soul. "We're here," Jabari said, his voice heavy. The guardian stepped forward, his face grim. "It is now or never. We destroy the drum." Kwame nodded and stepped toward the altar, but as he did, the ground shook again, and a dark shadow fell over them. The spirits had followed them. The spirits descended on them like a swarm, their forms flickering and shifting in the air. The jungle seemed to come alive, its roots and branches attacking like wild animals. The midnight drum's power grew stronger, feeding the chaos around them. "Ayo!" Kwame shouted. "Use the power. We need to stop them." Ayo closed his eyes, his hands trembling. The spirits were closing in on him, but he could feel the energy inside him rising. With a deep breath, he lifted his hands and shouted. A burst of light erupted from his palms, sending the spirits reeling. The shadows shrieked in agony, their forms dissipating into nothingness. But the midnight drum's power was not so easily undone. It pulsed with energy, growing stronger with every beat, feeding the spirits' fury. "We can't hold them off forever," Jabari cried. Kwame's heart raced. He had no choice. He had to destroy the drum. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for the midnight drum. The moment his fingers brushed the wood, a shock of energy ran through him, and the drum's power surged into his body. The jungle roared in anger, but Kwame held on. This was the moment. Kwame felt a surge of power flood his body, the energy from the midnight drum crashing into him like a wave. His bones burned with its force, his mind teetering on the edge of madness. The jungle around him seemed to pulse with its rhythm, as if the very land was alive with the drum's dark energy. He had touched it. The ancient curse had gripped him, and now he could feel the spirits swirling inside his mind, whispering in languages older than time itself. Kwame struggled to maintain control, fighting against the dark influence that sought to consume him. "Ayo!" he cried out, his voice barely a whisper in the chaos. "Help me." Ayo, still shaking from the battle with the spirits, stumbled toward him. His eyes burned with a mixture of desperation and determination. "You can do this, Kwame," Ayo said, his voice low but steady. "The drum is powerful, but you can control it." Kwame clenched his fists, his head spinning. How could he control such power? The very forces that had destroyed so many were now inside him, threatening to tear him apart. But there was no time. The spirits were closing in again, their dark forms swarming around him, trying to pull him away from the drum. Kwame took a deep breath and focused. He reached deep within himself, drawing on the strength he knew was there. The jungle had been his home for his entire life, and he would not let it fall. With a final cry, Kwame focused all his energy into the drum. The jungle fell silent. The spirits paused, their forms wavering in the air. The midnight drum, glowing with an eerie light, trembled in Kwame's hands. It was no longer a weapon of destruction, but a symbol of the jungle's power. Kwame felt the drum's pulse slow. It was as if the spirits had stopped listening to him. The connection between the jungle and the drum began to change, shifting from dark to light. A soft voice echoed in his mind. "You have freed us." Kwame's heart stopped. The voice was not the spirits, but something older, something that had existed before the drum. The guardian stepped forward, his expression one of awe. "You have done it, Kwame. You have broken the curse." Kwame lowered the drum, feeling its power ebb away. It no longer pulsed with darkness, but with a soft, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the jungle itself. But even as Kwame stood there, feeling the jungle's energy settle, a weight pressed on his heart. The power of the midnight drum had been broken, but not without cost. Ayo stumbled back, his body racked with exhaustion. His eyes flickered as if he were struggling to hold on to his consciousness. "Ayo," Kwame called out. "You're free. The spirits have released you." Ayo nodded weakly, but his face was pale. I can feel it, Kwame. The power is gone from me, but..." He looked at the jungle, his gaze far away. "I don't know if I can ever be whole again." Kwame reached out, grasping Ayo's shoulder. "You will be. The jungle has forgiven you. Now, we all have to heal." But even as he spoke, Kwame knew that Ayo's journey was far from over. The darkness inside him had been rooted deeply, and it would take time, perhaps a lifetime, for Ayo to recover fully. The jungle, once filled with shadows and spirits, now seemed peaceful. The sky above had cleared, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. It was as if the jungle itself had exhaled, released from the grip of the midnight drum's curse. Kwame, Ayo, Jabari, and the Guardian made their way back through the jungle, the path now open and clear. The spirits had retreated, their dark influence no longer clouding the land. The journey back to the village felt like a return to something familiar, something safe. The sounds of the jungle, birds singing, leaves rustling in the wind, felt like the jungle's way of welcoming them home. As they approached the village, the people came out to greet them, the elders, the children, everyone. But Kwame knew that the real battle had been fought, not just in the jungle, but within their own hearts. The village was alive with joy, but there was still a quiet sadness in the air. They had faced the spirits, and they had won. But there was no forgetting the destruction the drum had wrought, and no easy way to heal the wounds that had been left. Kwame stood at the edge of the village, watching the people rebuild, watching them dance and sing. The jungle was calm, but the memory of the midnight drum would never fade. Ayo stood beside him, still quiet, but no longer burdened by the darkness that had once consumed him. "We did it, Kwame," he said. "But the jungle..." He trailed off, his voice uncertain. Kwame smiled gently. "The jungle will heal, and so will we. We're not just the people of the jungle anymore, Ayo. We are its protectors." As the days passed, the Guardian prepared to leave. He had come to help them, to guide them through the battle with the spirits, but now his work was done. "You've done what was needed," the Guardian said, his voice a low murmur. "The jungle is free, but now it must be left to you." Kwame nodded. "Thank you. You've saved us all." The Guardian's eyes softened. "You were always meant for this, Kwame. Remember, the jungle is part of you, and you part of it. The drum's power was never yours to claim, but you were the one who could end it." With those final words, the Guardian turned and disappeared into the jungle, his figure swallowed by the trees. The village began to rebuild in earnest. Life returned to normal, but something had changed, something deep. There was a new respect for the jungle, a new understanding of its power and its dangers. Kwame, now regarded as the village's protector, stood at the edge of the jungle, looking out at the horizon. He knew the jungle would always be with him, that it would always be a part of his story. The midnight drum was no longer a threat, but it had left its mark on them all. The jungle had been reborn, and so had they. And as the first light of dawn rose over the trees, Kwame smiled, knowing that they had all survived the night, and that the jungle would live on, strong and free,